In this first episode of Let's Model series, we're going to go through for how to model a Half-Life inspired wooden supply crate. This one right here, the little smaller version of the crate. We'll go through and model everything here. We'll block it out first, then we'll go through and model each plank and create all the detail. And then using the same steps, you could expand it further to a wooden crate and then a shipping crate. Exact same steps that covered here, you'll be able to replicate it for the other two crates. And that way you'll have a full crate set of props you could use to populate the world. And of course, throughout this tutorial, I will be exporting to test things out inside Unreal Engine 5 to see if the scale is correct, to see how the detail looks inside the crate for the supply crate version. But I also went ahead and did the other two crates so I get to see how they all look together. So let's begin modeling. First thing in Maya, we're going to block out the bounded boxes for the crates. So this way we know the size of them before we go into blockout, and of course detail. We need to have an idea of how large these crates need to be. I'm only going to create and model the supply crate, but then on my own I will model the wooden crate and the shipping crate. But the steps will apply and be exactly the same for the other crates. But I will have three, so that way I have an idea of all three crate sizes. And having an additional crate size gives you a better understanding of proportion of how one crate relates to another. In this scene, I have a UE5 mannequin for scale to judge my scale, size, and dimensions of the environments I create, as well as a box that has the same height of a character scale of the mannequin. And again, in UE5 and UE4, the height of a character standard size is 180 centimeters in height. So by having this mannequin helps me to judge my proportion of the props and the environments I create. And I always have this loaded up as a template, then I save as a new file scene and start from here. So I'm gonna create a cube, and this is going to be our first crate, which is going to be the supply crate. And I'm gonna start punching in sizes into my input box. So I'm going to change the height balance to -1, so it always appears on top of the ground plane. It's a new feature in 2023, which is very useful. Might have been introduced in 2022. The width for this supply crate, let's do 70. The height is going to be 50, and I already have these values kind of figured out. I did a quick test, but I usually just start inputting a bunch of values in here and see how big the prop or the object looks. But these are the values that I'm going to go with. Again, you would just type these in and just see what the bounded box would look like for the prop to be created in. And this is pretty good size for the crate, for the supply crate. And I'm going off of just how the crate looks compared to the size, the scale reference in my scene. But I did look at the references extensively just to see how big the crate actually is. One of the better references is if you have a character that's always within the frame, next to the object, you get an idea of how large you need to make that crate. So that's pretty good size that I'm going to go with. And since I'm going to create the bounding boxes for all three crates, I also found this useful screenshot where it shows you all three crates that I'm going to create next to each other. So good reference of one object next to another. Also helps to determine the size and the scale of the crates better. Alright, so this is the first one. I like the size of this, and that's the one I'm going to keep. Let's create the second and the third one. And then we're going to export them all three, throw them right into Unreal Engine, just as these bounded boxes, and see how they look compared next to the player as you walk around. Going to create another cube. Input box, let's do -1, so it's on top of the ground plane. And this is going to be the wooden crate. For this one, width, height, and depth are all going to be set to 100. And this is pretty good size for the standard wooden crate. And the third one, let's move this out of the way. Another crate, this is going to be the shipping crate. The shipping crate will maintain the same size as the wooden crate. However, it's a little wider, so I'm going to double the size. So width is going to be 200. Height is going to be 100 and depth 100. And let's do a height baseline -1. So here's our shipping crate. And I'm kind of looking at my scale reference, comparing to see how big it is. Looks pretty good just in Maya alone right now. If it's too small or too big for you, you just have to rearrange those sizes, change the centimeter dimensions to something close to that you would want for your prop. But this way, there's no guesswork. You know exactly how big all your props or all your environments are compared to the character reference. And now let's go ahead and export all these 3 bounding boxes and then bring them into UE5 so we can walk around and see how it feels inside the level itself. So for exporting, I'm going to export these as FBX, and on export you need to position the pivot point at the world origin and the object itself. So this is going to be a pivot point right here on the bottom, and it is positioned in the world origin. And I'm going to export this. So I'm going to go to File, Export Selection. Actually, let's start with supply crate. So I'm going to snap that back into the world origin. Make sure it's selected. Go to File, Export Selection. I'm going to export it as FBX. And my options are set under Geometry to Smoothing Groups enabled, Smooth Mesh. And then I'm just going to give it a name. I already have my exported meshes folder created. That's where I'm going to export all of my meshes into. And this is going to be crate underscore supply and export selection. And I'm going to repeat the same thing for all the other ones. So I'm going to grab this one, position in world origin, file, export selection, and just go through all the steps that I just did for the other 2 crates. And now let's jump over into Unreal Engine 5, and I'm going to import all these bounded boxes and our starting static meshes into UE5 for making sure that the size is exactly what we want. Because these are going to be our bounded boxes that we block into and then eventually create the full object for us to use inside Unreal Engine. In UE5, I already have a project created and launched that I'm going to import the content into. And I already have a folder that I've set up where all my static meshes, textures, materials, and everything else that I may create for this specific environment, that everything will be placed into the subfolder. I also have a quick scene created, so it's a file, new level. It's the basic level with the mannequins, the same mannequin that I exported and used in Maya, and it's the UE4 mannequin that you can download from the marketplace as the mannequin mobile, or if you are using the third-person template, you will also have a set of mannequins for you to use to help you judge scale, dimensions, and proportions. And they'll be found under character, UE4 mannequin, or the mannequins. There's quite a few mannequins you can use. So if you included a third-person game template within your project, you'll have these available that you can just place into your level. And I've covered how to do this in many of the other videos on the website as well as on the YouTube channel. So let's go back and let me go into my subfolder for the environment, for the Half-Life 2 inspired environment. This is where I'm going to import everything into and just keep everything organized. So inside here, I'm going to create a quick folder, which is going to be static meshes. And inside here, this is where I'm going to import and bring in the 3 bounded box crates. Here are the 3 FBXs that we exported. Just going to select all 3 of these and just drag them into my static mesh folder. The only properties I'm going to kind of go through here is first, I am going to generate missing collisions, just so I have something. I don't need to create them right away. I don't need to mess with them. I'm going to let UE5 create them for me. And I'm also going to just kind of scroll down. I do not want to have any materials created. So I am not going to import any materials. So I'm going to make sure do not create materials is selected. I'll create my own. And I do not want to import textures. So I have this disabled. And then let's go ahead and import all. So now I have 3 different static meshes. So let's go ahead and place them right here. Right next to our scale mannequins. So here is the supply crate. Let's do the wooden crate and the shipping crate. Let's rotate this one. So now I have a way to jump and playtest right inside the map. And I have first person enabled. So in this project, what I have is a combination of first person enabled as well as a third person that I'm able to change between in order to playtest from a third person character player as well as from first person. So I can override to blueprint third person and I can spawn as a third person. Take a look if these meshes look to correct scale, dimension, and proportion. And then I can just go back to first person and check them out this way as well. Really great way to prototype, depending if you want that functionality. And that's easily done by adding on top of your existing template. So I've included third person template in this project when I first started this project. And then I added feature or content pack and I added the first person. And then I can switch between by overriding the game mode. All right, so as it comes to these 3 different size crates, they look pretty good. I like their sizes. They feel right in game through first person as well as third person. And the size overall is exactly what I would want. So now I know for a fact that these look good. And our next step is that I can go ahead and begin to block out where all the wooden planks are going to go and how overall the size of the actual shipping crate is going to be. So I will include all the blackout elements within each bounded box. And then we're going to do another pass where I actually model everything to make it look good. So again, we are only in this tutorial, I'm only going to focus on creating the full supply crate. But then all the rest of the steps, if you know how to create one, you'll be able to duplicate and do exactly the same thing for all the other crates by just repeating the same steps over and over again for the wooden crate and for the shipping crate, because the steps are going to be identical. Now let's begin the blockout process. I'm going to go ahead and move these 2 out of the way and bring this one back to the world origin. So this was just a bounded box. And within this box is where we're going to block out, which is our next step. We're not going to start modeling just yet. I'm just going to position all the important elements and just mesh together the supply crate from the wooden boards from the reference. So I'm going to be paying attention a lot to the reference. And here's what I'm going for. I want to construct this entire crate, the supply crate. We'll have individual pieces of plywood and individual pieces of boards positioned all around, just like we see in this reference. And I want this entire supply crate to be inside this bounded box. And the reason for this is because I want to be able to stack these crates on top of each other. So that means I'm going to position the wooden boards inside this template. So then at the end, we'll have an entire crate that will maintain the dimensions of 70 units in width and depth, and then 50 units in height. And this will be perfect for Unreal Engine 5 because then if I have a crate that's being stacked on top of another, it will be easier to do because it will fit within the 10 unit snap size distance. And yeah, we could lower. So for example, if I go beyond the established boundaries of the crate of these props, I could lower the size back down to 5 or 1 in order to stack them on top. I could also maybe utilize the surface snapping, but it'll make it a lot easier if it's within the grid size that I've established, within the 10 unit grid size. So let's go ahead and place this bounded box onto its own layer. And then I'm gonna lock it down. So let's call this one bounding box 1. Since I already have one created for another set of props, I'll just call this one different name. So now I'll be able to make it invisible as well as make it into a template and make it unselectable if I need it. So let's go ahead and make it into a wireframe. And then I'm going to create another cube. And I'm going to make this one same size at first, 70 by 70 by 50. And let's do -1. And then now I want to start creating the wooden planks. And again, I will be looking at references a lot, and I have it on my second monitor. So I have quite a lot of references collected that I will be constantly looking over. So you may not see these pop up all the time. So here are some of the references I've collected. Here's another good one. I'll be able to zoom in and just see the overall shape and the overall wooden planks that needs to be added across the entire supply crate, and quite a lot of other ones. So now I want to go ahead and create the wooden planks and then just begin to rearrange this so it's inside and contained within our bounded box. So I'm going to create another cube. Let me just raise this one up and let's just start adding. So basically now I am beginning to add the wooden planks on top. So I need to establish the size that I set those planks to. So let's say width is going to be set to, let's try 5, maybe 10 at first. Let's do height. I'm not sure for height. Let's do 5 to start. That's way too thick. Let's do depth at 50. Let's do 70 to kind of match the bounded box. Now let's do height at 2. And that's actually pretty good. Let's move it over here and let me just take a look. That's actually pretty good height for the wooden plank. Let's do -1 for baseline. Actually, let's do 1. So the pivot point is at the top of the object. And I can just take this and snap it down to the grid. So it's within the bounded box of our initial supply crate size. So now for this one, this is going to be inside. So I'm just going to drag this down. Again, I'm not going to be worried at the moment, try to make these perfectly flush. There will be overlapping, there will be a lot of gaps. Right now, I'm just blocking this in just to see if the overall size of all the pieces of the wooden boards across the supply crate are going to look good. So I am looking at this and I'm seeing there's one across here, one at the top. There's going to be one across connecting these two. Then there looks like there's another wooden piece right here, like almost the top. So I'm probably going to add that one in as a separate piece of geometry. I see there's 4 here on the bottom. So I'll probably take one of these, just duplicate it for the bottom and then duplicate it 3 more times. Then I'm seeing there's a little bit of a gap. So I'm paying attention to a lot of these details that I want to include in the supply crate. So I'm going to take this one, let's duplicate it, move it to the other side. Let's go to side view, just position it right there. And let's take this one and duplicate it. So I'm duplicating, hitting Control D to duplicate, and then I'm going to rotate this. If you hold down J and then rotate, it will rotate snap at 15 degree increments. And now I can just scale this one down. And let's just actually just take this and move it over here. And just reposition those verts. Again, there's quite a few gaps here. They're not flush. I'm not too concerned with this right now. Let's take this one and I want to duplicate it for the bottom. This one, it was the first one we created. So actually I want to keep the input. Anytime you duplicate, your input will be gone. So you cannot readjust the size or change the height baseline. So for this one, I want to go ahead and duplicate it for the bottom, but I want to keep the inputs. So I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate Special, Options box, and I want to enable Duplicate Input Graph, and I want to duplicate Special. So this will make a duplicate and keep the history. In our case, it's just the inputs for the initial cube creation. So I'll have it for this object as well as for the duplicated one. And for this one, this is going to be the bottom portion. So I need to set this to -1. So that way I can just snap this one at a pivot point right on top of the grid. And I'm just going to duplicate it. Let's move this one over. I'm going to duplicate it once. Then I'm going to press Shift D and this will duplicate and move it over using duplicate with transform. And it's this one, this shortcut right here, duplicate with transform, Shift D. It will remember the last movement position and it will move it that amount. And I'll just move this one over here. So now I have the bottom portion for the planks. Let's adjust this face and just move it up like so. Next, let's position another piece of 2 centimeter, 2 unit in height for the bottom portion, which is going to be this portion right here. So I like that little detailed lip that it has. And then we have the inner portion. So that's what I want to introduce. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece right here. I'm just going to duplicate it, and I'll just duplicate it as is, Control D. And I'll just move this one over here and just readjust the position of the verts and create that bottom portion like so. And then I'm going to take the bottom face for this and just move it up. Let's go to side view and just position on top. Close enough right now. Again, we are creating, this is a blackout. So we're not modeling anything. I'm just blocking things out. And then let's quickly block out these wooden boards right here on the sides. And it looks like there's another one at the top. So we might add that one in as well. But right now I just want to add the side pieces first. The ones on the corners. So for this, I'm just going to take this one. I'm going to duplicate it. Let's hold J, rotate snap 90 degrees all the way. And then rotate snap this way. And let's position it. For this, let's go to side view. I'm just going to position it right there. And let's modify the verts. Just drag these down. And then take and position this one right over here on the corner. Then I'm going to duplicate, rotate, another 90 degrees. Let's go to top view for this one. And I'm going to position it right over here, like so. So now we have a corner, and now I can take the face of this and just push it in. Let's go to top view and push it in all the way down right over here, as well as take these two, the other two verts on the side and push them in like so. So creating those indents for the interior portion. So now we are getting that little indentation of the supply crate. Then let's go ahead and add that little small piece of plywood that's at the very top. So we already have a piece of geometry for this. So I'm going to duplicate it and just move it all the way up. And it's going to be positioned right below the top boards. Now, once I have that, I need to adjust the height of the main piece of the supply crate. And I'll just need to drag this down and position it right below here, like so. Now for this very top board, it's actually flush with this piece below. So I just need to quickly adjust. And actually I need to make sure that I'm selecting the right one. So it's only this piece right here. So let's go to vertices, then go to top view. And then I'm just gonna drag these in like so for the entire perimeter. And I'm gonna leave those at the top and the side. Actually, let's do the side because I have the bounding boxes right here, so it's 2 units in. And for this one, I'm gonna leave it because I don't have any guiding geometry to kind of know how far I need to drag that in. I don't need to be precise here, but I'm just gonna leave that as is for right now. So here's what we are creating: an additional piece of the board that's at the top of the crate. So it's gonna look a lot more realistic. And I will probably need to rearrange maybe this piece right here, that piece, and just push that in like so. So it's right above and within the boundaries for this piece. So now I'm looking at another piece of reference. And actually there is a little bit of a gap that we can see right there. So maybe I need to push that in a little bit further. But here's where we created that piece of geometry right there. I could probably do this indent with a texture. Maybe I can do additional insert edge loops, but I'm kind of creating this as it would be created in the real world. So I'm actually positioning all the plywood pieces and all the wooden boards on top as they would be nailed down to create this actual supply crate. And in the end, it will look better. So actually I'm going to push that in a little bit more. And that looks pretty good. So now let's take these two pieces. I'm going to duplicate them and I'm going to move them over here. I might need to change the size of this one because it looks like it might be a little bit too big. So actually let's delete it. Let's adjust this one as well because it's probably not as thick. Might match the size of this on the side. So I'm actually going to take this and just make it smaller like so. And then I just need to duplicate it. This one will go right there. Let's make a duplicate of this. Actually, I'll make a duplicate of this copy right here. Let's go to top view. Position that one over here. Now that I know how far this needs to be pushed back in, so I can now select the interior portion, select the face, and just push that in until I reveal this board and that indent. And also do the same thing for this one. Take this face and just push that in. Like so. And now the only thing I have left is just take these boards right here, as well as these, and just duplicate it for the other side. So I'll do this one by one. I'll duplicate it, position this one over here, take this one and duplicate it and position that one over here. Let's go to top view. Like so. Let's grab this one, push it back. Looks like I need to adjust this piece right here, so I'll just grab this face and I'll just push that in right about there. And then a couple more copies. Duplicate this one over here. And then take this one, go to top view, make a duplicate, move it back here. And now a blackout should be done. And I'm just kind of looking around. I think this is pretty much it. I'm looking at the reference and I'm looking at this piece of geometry, all these kind of mashed together wooden boards. And they are pretty much contained within a 50 unit in height and within a bounded box. And this is looking like a good blackout. So I'm gonna do another test. I'm gonna select all the pieces that I've just created, all the blackout elements, and then I'm gonna combine them. This is a temporary combination because I want to go ahead and export them as FBX and then bring them into Unreal Engine 5 just to see from player's point of view if this is gonna look good. If it does, then I have my blackout template to begin to create and model this with more precision. And this is a blackout copy, so this is a more of a, I'm not gonna use this. I may use a wooden board, but I'm not gonna use this to actually model. I'm gonna use this as a template to match to. And so I know where to position all those wooden planks and where they need to go, what the sizes need to be, and so on. And then I will be extremely precise in making sure that everything is flush and aligned to each other. But let's do a test first. So with everything selected, I'm going to go to Mesh and Combine. And export it right from this position. So the pivot point is going to be positioned automatically right at the world origin when I export it from this position. So I'm not worried about trying to match that pivot point here because the object is already exactly where I would want it to be. And the pivot point automatically gets placed at the world origin. So I'm going to export this selection and I will update crate supply because we already have a copy of it. And by updating this copy and then re-importing it, it'll just update what I already have inside Maya. So I don't need to re-import as a brand new mesh. I just need to re-import it and update it right away. So let's do export selection and I am going to overwrite and replace it. All right, let's go ahead and get a little closer. And let me open up the static meshes and I'm going to right click on create supply and choose re-import. And here we have the blacked out version. Can make a copy of it. Let's just move it off and I'm going to spawn right next to it just to see. And that's looking pretty good. Good size for the wooden planks. Good supports on the bottom. And looks good next to the scale reference. But most importantly, it looks good from player's point of view. So I don't need to update anything. We are going to use this as a blackout template and now we can begin to model with more precision. So now that it looks good, we know that the proportions seem right. It looked really good inside Unreal. Now it's time to actually model this. So I'm not going to break this up again. I'm going to keep it combined and I'm going to go ahead and delete my history on this. Let's freeze transformations. Let's actually position the pivot point right on the bottom, right at the world origin, just to keep it there. And I'm going to place it in its own layer. And this layer is going to be blackout. And since I already have blackouts, let's do blackouts and I'm going to name it 1. Since I already have a display layer for that. And here we are. I'm going to go ahead and hide the bounding box display layer away, so we no longer need that for the supply crate. And now I'm able to turn this to a wireframe for the blackout in order to keep within the constraints and the proportions of our bounding box and within our blackout. So let's now model this. We could reuse some of these wooden planks and that would be our starting point for the modeling process, or we could just go ahead and start with brand new ones. This is a simple object, so I'm just going to create new meshes and I know exactly what the size of them needs to be. So I'm going to make sure that I have this on wireframe and let's introduce the overall cube. And I'm just simply going to input width to 70, depth to 70, height to 50, and height baseline -1. Then I'm just going to lower this because I know it needs to come down. And let's create our wooden planks at the top. New cube. This is going to be width at 10, height at 2, and depth at 5. Starting point, and then let's do this one at 1. Let's raise this one higher. Let's see, depth 70. Yep, 70 for depth. And let's just move it over here. And let's go to front view or side view. I'm gonna snap this to the very top to the grid, because within our bounded box, that's where we're gonna keep it. And I want to make sure that this is close enough to the side. I'm not so much worried this crate being bigger or smaller than 70 units in width and depth. However, I do want to make sure that it is 50 units in height. So The height is more important to me because I want to be able to stack those crates easily inside Unreal using the 10 unit grid snapping. But in terms of the depth and the width, I don't really care if they're smaller than 70 or more than 70. If this was an architecture element, if this was a building, a wall, a modular kit, then yes, width and height and depth would matter a lot, because I would have to align those walls together side by side and in height up and down. But for the crate, these crates are not going to be snapped next to each other perfectly. They will never get stacked in the real world completely flush, only when you stack them one on top of another. So that is pretty good. I'm just gonna take a look at the wireframe. It's kind of hard to see the wireframe. You can always turn this back on to the template instead, to the reference. And that wooden plank is done. Now, when it comes to wooden planks and repeating geometry, it's probably a good idea to start UVing these, and then you would duplicate them. So that way you don't have to UV all of these wooden planks when the time comes. So I'm not going to do this here, but as a side note, it's probably a good idea for any repeating elements, you UV one and then you duplicate so the UVs are already done. But since this tutorial is just focused on modeling, I'm not going to do that. Then let's go ahead and duplicate it for the other side. Let's go to front view, just align it right there. All right, that looks pretty good. Then let's take this. This is our main bounded box. Actually, I was going to align the top, but we need another lower portion. We need another piece of geometry right there. So I'm not going to worry about trying to snap it just yet. Let's take this piece of geometry right here and duplicate it for the sideboards. Now I'm going to rotate them just like we did when we were blocking out. And now I want to begin to be very precise where I snap. I don't want to have to leave any gaps or have these pieces overlap. So I'm going to start snapping. Snapping becomes very important. When we are now modeling with precision, snapping becomes your go-to. So there's a lot of options for snapping. You can snap components and you can snap the object itself. So we're going to be snapping both the object to other objects as well as different components to objects. So right now I want to go ahead and modify my pivot point to be right there at the very top corner. Let's move it right here. So I'm going to hold down D, V, middle mouse click and drag and snap that pivot point. And actually, let's move it to this corner right here. And let's snap that board right there. And let's move it over here. And actually, let's snap it maybe. Again, now we're beginning to slow down a little bit and start modeling this with a lot more precision. So I'm just gonna check and aligning. Let's snap the bottom portion, the bottom verts. So I'm just gonna move them up first. Let's position the boards on the bottom. So I need those 4 boards. So I'm gonna grab this one. I'm gonna duplicate it, move it down. Let's go to front view. And actually I'm gonna position the pivot point to be at the bottom corner. D, V, middle mouse click and drag. And then I'm gonna hold down X and snap at that pivot point on top of the grid. So it's flush. Then I'm gonna position it right where we had that board, the 4 boards on the bottom. I can kind of see there's actually let's position, there's one right here. So I'm gonna Control D to duplicate and just move them manually, one by one. Right over here. So we got 4 on the bottom now. Then I'm gonna now just move the bottom portion of the main area for the crate, for the supply crate. Then I'm gonna duplicate this again, Control D. Move this piece right at the top. So that's gonna be that second platform. And I can go ahead and actually snap to the template, to the blackout, but unfortunately we can't do this in this scenario because we didn't block out very precisely. We were just kind of mashing things together. So that's not gonna work for us. It will leave gaps because we weren't concerned with gaps during the blackout. So instead, I'm going to snap to the bottom portion because I know that's flush. I know that we're doing being very precise here. So I'm going to just hold V and middle mouse click and drag to snap to that vertex on the bottom. Now I'm going to take this face and move it right over here. So now I know the bottom, these 2 pieces are completely flush with each other and not overlapping. Now, could you overlap those pieces? Yes. You probably could get away with overlapping and nothing bad will happen. You saw how big that mesh is inside Unreal, and if there's any overlapping, you would not see anything bad happening. So you could get away with it and not run into any problems. I want to be very precise with this. I like to model my hard surface geometry very neatly, but yes, you could get away with overlaps on this piece of geometry. Now that I know that this is at the very top where I need it, and it's laying flat on top of these boards, that's going to be my base now. Now I can take this piece of geometry, take these vertices, and then just snap them all the way down and align them flush with this piece of geometry. So with those 4 verts selected, I'm going to hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, and they will snap right to this piece of geometry on the bottom. And they're kind of snapping, but let me go ahead and hide the blackout, because I think it's trying to snap to the blackout. So hold on V, snap, here we are. Now I'm going to go ahead and start modifying this a little bit. Let's push this one forward a little bit so we have that plank on top. Also, I'm going to modify this plank. Let me put that back on. Select the faces and just find where that wooden board for during the blackout was, because there was a lot. We decided that it was going to be a lot smaller, so right there. And let's take this piece right here and actually just push it back, make it slightly smaller. And tiny little gaps like this really add to more realism for your props. And I will probably adjust a little later on. I will adjust these wooden boards so they're not so flush and perfectly straight with this piece of plywood. I'll probably move some of these back, maybe scale them down. So there's a little bit of indents and imperfection. All right, now I can go ahead and take this main area and snap it down. So I'm going to select that face, hold V. Let's activate the Y axis. So it will only snap down on Y axis, up and down. With it highlighted in yellow, I'm going to hold down V, and I want to snap that entire face to the same height as this edge and this vertex. So I'm going to hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, and it will snap straight down to that face flush. So now I know that piece of geometry, that face, is laying flat and perfectly aligned to this piece of plywood, to that face below. Now let's go ahead and snap this face and move it in. And again, I could leave slight overlap right here and it will be completely fine. But if I wanted to be more precise, let's say I want to snap that face to be flush, completely flush with this edge right here on the wooden plank here, can easily do so. I'm going to highlight the x-axis side to side. Then I'm going to hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, and it will snap. And actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and disable it, because sometimes it will start snapping to the template itself, not to the geometry that I'm trying to snap to. So I'm going to disable the blackout template. Hold down V again and just snap to that vertex. Now it's completely flush. Then we need to deal with this face right here, because there's a bit of an indent. Let me turn our blackout template back on. Actually, let me set it to the reference. So there's a bit of a indent right there. So we need that 2-unit indent. But I don't know how far to snap this to, because the blackout is not precise. So we need to take this board right here, and I'm going to duplicate it. Control D. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And the pivot point was already in that corner vertex, so it rotated perfectly. So I don't need to snap anything to that. Let me take a look at the front view. Yep, perfect. And that's it. That's it for that piece of geometry. So now I'm going to take this face right here, and I'm going to snap that face to this vertex right in the corner, so it aligns. So I'm going to hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, snaps. Let's check. Perfect. So I'm going to lower this down. So we need to take another piece of geometry, that plywood on the bottom, because we had an additional piece that we created for the top, like there was a plywood piece on top of the supply crate that we could lift up. So we need to introduce that. So for this one, again, you need to utilize the snaps. I already have a 2 centimeter board right on the bottom, so I can duplicate that one, move it up to the top. But I need to make it flush to the very top, right below this board. And then I need to push these faces in so they are aligned with this piece of geometry, with this board. So there's a lot of alignment that you have to be careful of. And if you want to make this super precise, then you just have to be very aware of where everything is going. So let's do that. I'm gonna undo, grab this face, push it back. It's already aligned. That highlight, that Z axis already highlighted. So that means it's gonna snap only along that axis. And I'm just gonna hold down V and snap to this vertex. Perfect. Now I wanna go ahead and snap a little lower. I wanna snap so this face right here is aligned to this vertex at the top and right below this board. So for that, let's go ahead and right here in the corner, I'm gonna position the pivot point, snap it to this vertex, D, V, middle mouse click and drag. And now I'm gonna highlight the y-axis. And I wanna make sure that this is snapped and will be flush with this face right here in this vert, right on the same axis. So with this highlighted, hold V, middle mouse click and drag, and you can see that it just snapped. It didn't move to this because I highlighted the axes. Being able to master these pivot points and being able to snap these objects exactly where you need them is absolutely important. It'll make you stand out and be able to just snap any piece of geometry anywhere you want with extreme precision. It's something I don't see very often. So now I want to make sure that this face will snap and be aligned flush with this piece of geometry. So I'm going to select this face. I'm going to make sure I highlight the x-axis. And I'm just going to hold V and middle mouse click and drag, and it will snap. It snapped to this vertex right here at the very top. And we know there's a vertex here because we already snapped it to the very top of this board. And here we are. It's flush, completely, perfectly straight and aligned with each other. And now that this piece of geometry is aligned to the very top, now I can go ahead and take this face and snap it to the top of this board. So I'm going to highlight the y-axis, going to hold down V, middle mouse click and drag on this vert, so that face snaps to that vert and moves the face up. All right, now it's coming along. All of these pieces are now extremely precise and they are all aligned together. Now I do want to also say that all these are very perfectly aligned together. We will do a imperfection pass to where we'll create a bit of more of indents and just kind of reposition some of these boards so they're not so flush in certain areas. But right now I just want to make sure that they're all aligned and flush with each other before we do an imperfection pass. All right, let's bring back the blockout. Let's just take a look. And let me just drag this block out a little further away from everything. Just want to be able to select it and just see it. All right. Okay, I'm just kind of checking. Let's bring it back. Let's lock it back down. Now that we have those few boards positioned, it'll make it a lot easier for us to duplicate and reposition all across because we already have the bottom portion done. Everything is flush together. So all we have left really to do is just reposition the interior portion, as well as just duplicate these wooden planks that are vertical all the way across our supply crate. Let's duplicate this one, move it over here. And I'm going to duplicate this one, move it on the other side. For this particular one, actually, we can go ahead and we no longer need, I don't think we need the blackout, so I'm just going to disable it. Let's snap this piece, hold V, middle mouse click and drag to that corner. I'm going to modify the pivot point, D, V, middle mouse click and drag, and then snap that one right to that vertex. Let's take this piece because I already have something to snap to. I'm going to select this face, highlight the x-axis, hold V, middle mouse click and drag so it snaps to that vertex. And then let's also modify this one. This one just needs to be snapped. I'm just checking the other side. Yep, just needs to be snapped to this vertex as well. So I'm gonna highlight that axis, the x-axis, hold V, middle mouse click and drag on this vertex, snapped. All right, so that side is done. Let's repeat it for the other side. We just have 4 planks to go, and then we have 1 plank at the top. So I'm gonna duplicate this one to the other side, and then also duplicate this one. Control D, and now we can start snapping. So for this, just trying to figure out the best way to start snapping. Let's snap this one to the corner. Hold down D, V, modify the pivot first, and then snap at that pivot right to that vertex. Now I can modify this pivot, snap this wooden plank right in the corner. Now that I have these positioned, we just have to snap these faces. I'm gonna highlight the Z-axis, and I just need to find that vertex to snap to, which is going to be this one right here. Hold V, middle mouse click and drag. Done. And let's do the same thing for this face. That's fine. What we need to snap to should be that vertex right at the top. Hold V. Actually, I want to make sure that I highlighted the Z-axis, and I did. And let's snap. Once you try this a few times, your ability to snap will speed up by a lot. And let me make sure I highlight it. Looks like I unselected that. Let me just drag this out of the way so I make sure that it is selected. Then hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, and snapped. All right, that's looking good. And let's take this one right here. I'm gonna duplicate it, position it first. Take this board, duplicate it, position it first. And after these two, we are done, and we just need the one at the top. So I'm gonna take this, modify the pivot point first. D, V, middle mouse click and drag. And let's snap it right there. Looks like I'm creating a slight gap here. And that's because this top is not completely flush with the outside, so I'm leaving a bit of a gap. So let me undo this really quick. I'm gonna actually snap this pivot point to another location. So let me move this. I might have to check the other side as well. Let me go to top view. And let's modify the pivot point right here in the corner. And I'm gonna hold down V, middle mouse click and drag, snap that over here, and I can move it out. And let me take a look at this piece of geometry. Alright, so that's the bottom. I'm just doing double checks. Yeah, I shouldn't be snapping to the very top because that one is not completely flush. But again, I will go through and just kind of do an imperfection pass. But right now, I'm just trying to make sure that everything is flush and snap together. And now I can go ahead and modify the pivot point that's already in the corner where I want it. And let's just take this one and I'm going to snap it to that corner. Actually, but let's modify it to the front, to the other side, to this round right here. And then I'm going to hold down V, middle mouse click and drag. And that should be aligned. And again, if it's overlapping, that's completely fine. We don't need to, I was trying to keep everything flush, but if it's not, no big deal. If I do want it, then I would modify the pivot point here, highlight the x-axis, and then I would just find that pivot point. I can go in the wireframe, press 4, and just snap it right there. And then I can take this one and then snap this one right over here. So actually go in the wireframe in certain sections will probably help out a lot as well. Let me double check on this one right here. I'm going to press 5 to go in the shaded mode and make sure that I'm not leaving any gaps. And it looks like I'm not. So at this point, you may want to go ahead and check everything to see if you left any gaps. Overlaps are fine, but gaps of geometry where you can kind of see, maybe right inside the geometry like so, probably not a good idea. Probably want to remove those. And then for the last piece, let's do the board at the very top. For this one, I'm going to grab this one, Control D to duplicate. Let's rotate 90 degrees. Let's go to top view. I'm gonna position this somewhere in the center. And then I'm gonna select the verts, and I can snap these verts to this edge by highlighting the x-axis only. And I can either hold C to snap them to an edge, or I could snap them to a vertex. Either way, it'll align. And I can do the same thing. Highlight the x-axis, hold C, click on this edge right here, middle mouse click and drag, it'll be aligned. So you can snap to edges, you can snap to verts, you can snap to the grid, snap to anything that will help you to align your geometry better. And the plank at the top is slightly smaller, so we can just scale this down. Not by much, just a little bit. Alright, so here is our model crate. Everything is perfectly aligned to each other. So our next two steps is to do an imperfection pass. So everything is not so perfectly aligned to each other. So that way we can leave a little bit of imperfection. You know, one wooden board is not perfectly flush with another edge. You know, create a bit of a gap right here, for example. Maybe select this face and just move it back a little bit. Like so. Create a little bit of an indent, a little bit of geometry showing through, something like that. And just go through and do an imperfection pass everywhere and make it look like it was constructed by a real person. That was manually made together. And so it's not so CG. And then we will optimize this by deleting faces that are not going to be seen. Thus, they don't need a texture and you wouldn't have to UV those faces. So there are quite a few faces that you may want to delete. For example, this piece of geometry right here. The face at the top. We have this face right here. So we can actually delete the face at the very top because it's never going to be seen. So that would be our next step. Imperfection pass and optimization. First thing I want to do is fix this up a little bit. So we have this portion on the bottom that's by itself. So we have a very large surface face that is not going to add anything to it. And it's mostly hidden. So I want to fix that, as well as this piece right here. I actually want to not have this as a separate piece. So that's the first thing I want to attack. And it's more of an optimization part at this moment. So I'm actually going to delete this panel on the bottom. Actually, I'm going to keep it, but I will delete it after I fix it. And I take this main supply area of the crate. Let's go to wireframe. And I'm going to switch over to faces. Grab this face. And I'm going to extrude that down. So I'm going to hold Shift, extrude that down. Go to side view so I can snap it. Holding V or C and just snap it to that bottom portion. So now it's going to be flush with planks on the bottom. And let's go back to wireframe, and I'm going to select the faces on the side. Go back to shaded. So I'm hitting 4 for wireframe and 5 for shaded mode. Then I'm going to extrude those faces around, Control E, and add some thickness. And I'm going to add thickness at 2, and just take a look. As long as it goes above the boards, the vertical planks, it should be good. And it looks like everything is covered up, and that should be fine. So now I can take that individual portion that I had and delete it. So now this is a little bit better because I don't have that empty big face that's been hidden. And this is going to be much better. And then for the top one, again, I have two faces that are being hidden, so I would either have to delete them, but why have this as a separate piece of geometry where I can just take this top face and then extrude it? And the reason I'm extruding this is because I introduce an extra face that I can detach in the UVs and have it separate, so maybe I can apply a different texture to it, and it will look like it's being separated. So it might be a little bit darker of plywood, and then this might be a lighter plywood. So it gives me a little bit of a flexibility to add a different texture for this face only. But now I want to go ahead and snap this to the edge right here. So I'm going to hold on C and just snap it. Let me take a look at the side view. And that looks flush. Alright, that is much better. Then let's do a pass on the boards right here. I don't want to move around all the boards, just a few. And I'm going to just focus on these vertical pieces. So So I'm going to switch over to a face, and I'm just going to push the face in slightly, just to introduce a bit of an edge separation right there. And I'm going to do this to all of these. And I'm going to push that one in. Again, not too much, just enough that it gives a little bit of a gap or a border. And I have a border at the top, on the side, and I'll do the same thing for this one right here. Let me take a look at what it's doing right over here, and let's do one more on the other side. And push that in. That should give a bit of a interesting definition, because now I have a bit of extra geometry there that you can see, as well as we'll have some lighting shadow that's going to be able to kind of separate those two pieces of geometry. That's adding to the realism and making it look better. And then let's do one more. Let's do for the top one as well. I'm gonna actually grab this face and just push it down, making it a little bit more imperfect. So that way we have a little bit of a gap right there. So it's not all aligned perfectly everywhere. And then for the last imperfection pass, again, you don't have to do a lot. Just a little bit here and there adds to the realism. And the last imperfection pass I want to do is for the boards on the bottom. So I'm going to just select all the verts and just push some of these in at different distances. Again, player will probably never notice the distance. I could probably do them all together, but it only takes a few seconds to do them separately, so they're not exactly together, and it'll look better. Here we go. And now, with the imperfection pass done, let's delete the faces that we will never see. So we need that face in the bottom. All these faces should remain right where they are. We have the face right here, so we'll see the texture there, so I'm not going to delete that. However, there's a face on top and the bottom, as well as for this one. So I'm actually going to isolate the ones that I need to delete. So most of these boards right here will have a face at the top and the bottom that we will never see. So I'm going to select them all. And then I'm going to press Ctrl 1 to isolate select. And I will only see what I have selected. I'm going to switch over to faces, and let me do this all together. Select the faces, and then I'm going to start deleting the top faces and the bottom faces only. And they are hidden by other pieces of geometry, so we're not going to see that gap of no geometry underneath. So any faces that you're not going to see rendered, just remove them, delete them, and it'll make it easier to UV, because you're not going to have to worry about UVing those and placing them somewhere within your UV layout, because again, they're not going to be seen. Press Ctrl 1 to bring everything back and just take a look. Let's do the same thing for these four boards. Ctrl 1 to isolate select, go to faces, and these boards right here are never going to be seen. Delete. Ctrl 1, bring everything back. And then let's see what else. This one right here, we have 1, 2, 3. So one on the bottom, two on the side. Those faces can be deleted. Delete this one, and that one. And let's take a look. I'm just kind of flying around and seeing if anything else needs to be done to this. I think overall, I think we are done. It's been optimized. We did a slight imperfection pass. And let's go ahead and select everything, combine it, mesh, combine, and then we're going to export this as our new version so we can take a look at what it looks like inside Unreal Engine 5. So I'm going to go to File, Export Selection, and then let me update and overwrite our Create Supply. Let's select our mesh inside the content browser, Create Supply, right click, and re-import. And let's just take a look what it looks like inside Unreal. Let's see if I can see any gaps, anything that kind of needs to be fixed. I'm going to switch over to one of the other modes, maybe detail lighting, so that way I can see it a little bit better, or maybe just lighting only. And let me lower the camera speed, so that way I can just really fly around Just see those little indents, the little imperfection passes right there. That looks pretty good. Maybe see if I need to add anything else. Let me go back to detail editing. And just slowly observe and take a look at everything. See if I need to change, update, fix. And if everything geometry-wise looks good, then we are done modeling-wise. And using the exact same steps and technique, I went ahead and also modeled the wooden crate that's slightly bigger than the supply crate, and then the shipping crate. So now we'll have 3 different versions of different crates that you've seen in Half-Life 2. And of course I brought them over into Unreal Engine 5 just to test it out, take a look. And they look pretty good. Good size, good scale, and enough detail within each one to populate the world. Now, of course, the next step would be to UV everything and then to texture. Now, UVing and texturing is its whole separate subset that you would have to go through yourself, since we are just focusing on modeling in this series. But if you want to know how to UV, there's not much to it other than knowing how to do it. It's an important part of the process. Before you begin texturing, you have to UV objects. So if you want to know how to UV quickly and get very proficient at it using Maya, take a look at the 3rd module in the Maya Foundation Home Study course. I cover everything you need to know about how to UV objects quickly, efficiently, so you can begin texturing. Alright, so that is it for the first Let's Model episode. See you in the next one.